A clinking cocktail glass can mask the sound of a loaded gun. In the city's most exclusive restaurant, a betrayal was perfectly orchestrated to end an empire. But the assassins made one fatal mistake. They completely ignored the heavy-set waitress refilling their water. She saw absolutely everything. Clara Jenkins knew the true superpower of being a fat woman in a high-end establishment, absolute, unquestioned invisibility. At L'Étoile, a Michelin-starred fortress of French cuisine, tucked into Chicago's affluent Gold Coast, the patrons preferred their service staff to be sleek, silent, and entirely unmemorable. Clara was certainly silent, but at 280 pounds, she took up space. Yet in the eyes of the billionaires, politicians, and underworld kings who dined there, her size rendered her a non-entity. They looked right through her, assuming someone of her build couldn't possibly possess the sharpest eyes in the room. They spoke of millions of dollars in laundered funds, political blackmail, and illicit affairs, while she quietly scraped truffle remnants from their Limoges porcelain plates. On a damp Tuesday evening in late October, the atmosphere inside L'Étoile was unusually thick. Clara adjusted her black apron, smoothing it over her wide hips, and picked up a fresh, silver water pitcher. The reservation list for Table 7 had been booked under a shell corporation, but every staff member knew who was coming. Damien Rossi. Damien wasn't just a businessman. He was the undisputed architect of the Rossi crime syndicate. Operating under the guise of Rossi Logistics and Freight, his reach extended from the ports of Chicago all the way down to Miami. He was a man of quiet, terrifying authority. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He simply commanded the room by breathing in it. At precisely 8 o'clock, the heavy mahogany doors parted. Damien walked in, shedding a tailored cashmere overcoat into the hands of a trembling hostess. Beside him was Chloe Vanderwall. Chloe was a striking socialite, the heiress to a minor pharmaceutical fortune that had seen better days. She was all sharp angles, platinum hair, and predatory grace, wearing a silk emerald gown that clung to her frame like a second skin. To the untrained eye, she was the perfect mob accessory, beautiful, poised, and utterly devoted. But Clara's eyes were far from untrained. As Clara approached Table 7 to pour the initial round of sparkling water, she noticed the micro-expressions. Chloe's smile was flawless, but her eyes were frantic, darting toward the restaurant's brass-trimmed entrance, and then toward the dimly lit bar area in the back. Her manicured fingers resting on the white linen tablecloth tapped an erratic, anxious rhythm. "The sea bass for the lady," Damien told the waiter smoothly, his deep voice carrying a gravelly undertone. "And the bone-in ribeye for me." "Rare." Clara stepped in, lifting her pitcher. "Still or sparkling, Mr. Rossi?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully modulated. "Sparkling. Thank you," he replied, not glancing up from his phone. As Clara poured, Chloe shifted in her seat. The socialite's designer clutch sat slightly open on the table, and Clara, standing at a vantage point above them, caught a glimpse of the glowing screen inside. It was a text thread. The last message received was a single word, "ready." Clara's heart did a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She backed away respectfully, bowing her head and retreating toward the service station. From the shadows of the alcove, she began scanning the restaurant. L'Étoile was meticulously managed. Clara knew every regular, every face, every pattern. Tonight, the pattern was broken. Booth 4. Two men nursing neat whiskies. They wore off-the-rack suits that bunched at the shoulders, concealing something bulky beneath their armpits. They weren't touching their drinks. Their eyes were locked on the reflection of Damien's table in the mirrored wall. The Bar A man in a charcoal trench coat had been sitting there for 20 minutes. He hadn't ordered food. His left hand was buried deep in his pocket. The kitchen exit, the busboy, a young kid named Tomas, who usually lingered near the swinging doors, had quietly vanished. Clara wiped down a tray, her mind racing. She recognized the man at the bar from a late-night news segment she had watched weeks ago. Jonathan Jackal. Hayes, a freelance contractor, heavily associated with the Irish factions on the south side. The Rossi Syndicate had recently pushed the Irish out of the Fulton Market district. This wasn't just a dinner. This was a synchronized hit. And Chloe Vanderwall had served Damien up on a silver platter. Clara watched as Chloe suddenly stood up, smoothing her emerald dress. "I'm just going to step into the ladies' room, darling," she cooed, leaning down to brush her lips against Damien's cheek. "Take your time," Damien murmured, swirling his scotch. As Chloe walked away, she briefly caught the eye of the man in the charcoal trench coat at the bar. She gave a microscopic, almost imperceptible nod. The man shifted, uncrossing his legs. Clara's breath hitched. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Chloe was stepping out of the line of fire. The moment she was safely inside the reinforced marble walls of the restroom, the men in booth 4 and the man at the bar were going to converge on table 7. Damien Rossi was going to be gunned down right over his bone-in ribeye, and Clara, along with the rest of the staff, would be caught in the crossfire. She looked at Damien. He was sitting alone, looking at his phone, completely oblivious to the fact that his empire was about to end in a spray of bullets and shattered glass. He had always been polite to Clara. He never snapped his fingers at her, never treated her like an idiot because of her weight. Last Christmas, he had left a $5,000 tip for the back-of-house staff. Clara made a decision. She wasn't going to let this man die on her shift. The kitchen was a cacophony of shouting chefs, clattering pans and hissing steam. But to Clara, the noise faded into a dull roar. Her hands were shaking. She moved to the service terminal, tearing a small blank sheet of receipt paper from the machine. She dug a cheap blue ballpoint pen out of her apron pocket. She needed to be fast. She needed to be concise. There was no time for explanations, and if she warned him verbally, the assassins would see the panic rushing their timeline. Pressing the paper against the stainless steel counter, Clara wrote in sharp block letters, "Your girlfriend sold you out. They are in position. Bar and booth 4. She folded the tiny square of paper twice until it was no bigger than a postage stamp. She palmed it, her sweaty skin clinging to the thermal paper. "Order up for table 7, Chef Laurent barked, slamming a silver cloche over a plate. "Clara, run the sides. Now." Clara grabbed the tray of creamed spinach and truffle potatoes. Her heavy footsteps felt like lead weights on the tiled floor as she pushed through the swinging doors and re-entered the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted. The air was practically vibrating with lethal intent. The 2 men in booth 4 were leaning forward, their hands slipping into their jackets. The man at the bar had stood up, tossing a crumpled $100 bill onto the counter. Chloe was nowhere to be seen. She was securely hidden in the restroom. Clara approached table 7. Her large frame completely blocked the line of sight between the bar and Damien for a split second. She set the heavy ceramic bowls of side dishes down with practiced grace. "Your sides, Mr. Rossi," Clara said quietly. "Thank you," Damien said, picking up his fork. As Clara reached forward to adjust his Scotch glass, she extended her index finger, pressing the folded receipt paper directly against the base of the glass, sliding it smoothly under the crystal rim. Damien's eyes flicked from the glass to her face. Clara didn't break eye contact. Her round, flushed face was devoid of the usual subservient hospitality smile. Her eyes were wide, urgent, and dead serious. She gave a singular heavy nod, then immediately turned her broad back and walked away, her hips swaying with a forced, casual rhythm. From the safety of the Waitress station, Clara watched her pulse pounding in her ears. Damien Rossi was a predator who had survived 36 years in a world where men rarely lived past 30. He didn't gasp. He didn't look over his shoulder. He seamlessly moved his hand to his glass, taking a sip of scotch, and as he set the glass down, his thumb swept the folded paper into his palm. He unrolled it under the table, shielded by the heavy linen cloth. Clara counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. She saw the exact moment the words registered in his brain. The muscles in Damien's jaw feathered a microscopic tightening of his facial features. His posture changed entirely. Moments ago, he was a relaxed man, enjoying an evening with his lover. Now, every muscle in his back was coiled like a spring. Instead of drawing a weapon, Damien reached into his breast pocket and casually pulled out his phone. He typed something out with his thumb, his face a mask of supreme indifference. Across the room, the man in the trench coat took his first step toward table 7. Suddenly, Chloe emerged from the hallway leading to the restrooms. She walked with forced elegance, a fake smile plastered across her face. She returned to her seat, smoothing her dress. "Sorry, darling," Chloe murmured, reaching for her wine glass. "The clasp on my shoe was coming loose." Damien looked at her. It was a look of pure, terrifying void. "Is that right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said, taking a sip. Her hand was trembling so badly the wine sloshed against the glass. "Why are you looking at me like that, Damien?" "I'm just admiring you." Damien lied his voice, like velvet over broken glass. "You know, Chloe, it's funny. I was just thinking about your brother Richard. How is his debt problem holding up?" Chloe blanched, all the color drained from her perfectly contoured face. "Richard, he's fine. Why do you ask?" "Because," Damien said, leaning forward, steepling his fingers, "I heard he took a sizable loan from the Southside Irish, a loan he couldn't pay. Unless, of course, he offered them something of equal value to cancel the debt." Chloe's breath hitched. She glanced frantically toward the bar, making accidental fatal eye contact with Jonathan Hayes. That was all the confirmation Damien needed. The waitress was right. Damien didn't hesitate. With lightning speed, his left hand shot out across the table, grabbing Chloe by the throat of her emerald dress. He yanked her forward violently, using her body as a human shield, just as the man in the trench coat pulled a suppressed Glock from his pocket and raised it. "Get down!" Clara screamed at the top of her lungs, her booming voice shattering the quiet elegance of the restaurant. Chaos erupted. Patrons shrieked, diving under tables, as the first suppressed shot futted through the air, shattering the bottle of sparkling water, right where Damien's chest had been a millisecond prior. Damien hurled Chloe backward into the oncoming path of the two men, rushing from booth 4, causing them to stumble over her flailing limbs. In the same fluid motion, Damien drew a compact Sig Sauer from his ankle holster. He didn't fire blindly. He fired with surgical precision. Crack, crack. The two men from booth 4 dropped their knees, giving out as Damien's rounds found their marks in their kneecaps and shoulders. The restaurant was a deafening chorus of screams, shattering plates and rushing bodies. Clara had thrown her massive frame behind the solid oak wood of the hostess stand, pulling the young, terrified hostess down with her. She peeked around the corner. Damien was advancing on the trenchcoat assassin, dodging a wild shot that tore through a Renaissance painting on the wall. Damien moved like a ghost, closing the distance and delivering a brutal strike to the man's wrist, sending the Glock skittering across the polished hardwood floor. With a swift kick to the back of the assassin's knees, Damien had him pinned to the ground. The entire violent ballet had taken less than 15 seconds. The restaurant fell into a horrified, breathless silence, broken only by the whimpering of Chloe Vanderwall, who was huddled on the floor, her beautiful emerald dress covered in spilled wine and broken glass. Damien stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving slightly. He looked down at Chloe, his eyes entirely devoid of mercy. "You should have let Richard die," Damien said coldly. He then turned his head, scanning the terrified crowd hiding under the tables. His dark eyes swept over the room until they locked onto the large, breathless woman peeking out from behind the oak stand. Damien's gaze met Clara's. He slowly raised his hand, tapping 2 fingers against his temple in a silent salute of profound gratitude. He owed her his life, and a man like Damien Rossi never left a debt unpaid. But as the distant wail of Chicago police sirens began to echo through the rain-slicked streets, Clara knew that slipping that note hadn't just saved a mafia boss. It had irrevocably dragged her directly into his dark, dangerous world. The aftermath of the L'Etoile shootout was a masterclass in underworld efficiency. Before the first police cruiser even squealed to a halt outside the restaurant, Damien Rossi's fixers had already infiltrated the scene. They were men in sharp suits who moved with terrifying purpose, wiping down surfaces, gathering the discarded weapons, and quietly escorting a sobbing Chloe Vanderwall out through the service alley. When the Chicago Police Department finally breached the dining room, they found 2 bleeding hitmen, a shattered restaurant, and a highly rehearsed narrative. Damien's high-powered attorneys had already arrived, presenting a watertight case of self-defense against known cartel associates. Through it all, Clara played her part perfectly. When Detective Harrison, a weary, overworked man with a cheap trench coat, shined a flashlight in her face and asked what she saw, she gave him the exact performance the world expected of her. "I don't know," Clara stammered, wrapping her arms around her broad frame, letting her voice tremble. I was serving the creamed spinach. I heard pops. I dropped the tray and hid behind the wood stand. I swear that's all I saw. I just closed my eyes and prayed." The detective barely wrote it down. To him, she was just another hysterical, traumatized civilian. An invisible overweight waitress who couldn't possibly be of any tactical use. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. For 3 days, Clara's life returned to a paralyzing semblance of normal. The restaurant was closed for renovations, so she stayed locked in her cramped second-story apartment in Logan Square, jumping at every creaking floorboard. She kept expecting men with suppressed pistols to kick down her door. She had interfered in a mob hit. People like her didn't survive things like that. On the 4th night, the rain was coming down in sheets. Clara was walking back from a late-night run to the corner bodega, clutching a plastic bag of groceries against her heavy coat. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the wet pavement. A black Cadillac Escalade, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian, glided to a stop right beside her. Clara froze. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked around, calculating the distance to her apartment building. It was too far. She couldn't run. The rear passenger door swung open. A man stepped out holding a large black umbrella. He wasn't a thug. He wore a bespoke navy suit and carried himself with lethal discipline. "Clara Jenkins," the man said. His voice was smooth, devoid of threat, but thick with authority. "My name is Leon. Mr. Rossi would like a word with you." Clara clutched her groceries tighter. "I don't have anything to say to the police, or anyone else." "Mr. Rossi isn't the police." "Clara," Leon replied, stepping aside to reveal the plush leather interior of the SUV. "And he doesn't want to hurt you. He wants to thank you. Please, It would be entirely in your best interest to get in. Swallowing her fear, Clara climbed into the back seat. The door clicked shut, plunging her into a world of climate-controlled luxury and faint cologne. They drove for an hour, leaving the grimy streets of the city behind for the sprawling forested estates of Lake Forest. The Escalade passed through massive wrought-iron gates, pulling up to a stunning stone mansion overlooking Lake Michigan. Leon escorted her inside, leading her down a long hallway, lined with museum-quality art, until he opened a set of heavy oak double doors. "Miss Jenkins, sir," Leon announced, stepping back and closing the door behind her. The study was cavernous, smelling of old paper leather and expensive bourbon. A fire roared in the hearth. Standing by the massive bay window, looking out at the stormy lake, was Damian Rossi. He wore a simple black turtleneck and dark slacks, looking less like a ruthless crime boss and more like a weary king. He turned, his dark eyes locked onto her, and for the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel invisible. She felt entirely exposed. "Clara," Damian said, walking over to a crystal decanter. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Do you drink?" "Only when my life is in imminent danger," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. The corner of Damian's mouth twitched upward into a rare, genuine smile. He handed her a glass. "You aren't in danger here, I promise you that." "Drink." She took a sip. It burned like liquid fire going down, but warmed her freezing chest. "I did a background check on you," Damian said, leaning against the edge of his mahogany desk. "Clara Jenkins, 32 years old, no criminal record, a degree in psychology you never used. You've worked in high-end hospitality for 10 years. You have a quiet life. A very quiet life." "I like quiet," Clara said defensively. "Quiet saved my life," Damian corrected her, his tone dropping an octave, becoming intensely serious. "That note. You noticed Jackal at the bar. You noticed the 2 hitters in booth 4. But more importantly, you noticed Chloe." Clara looked down at her glass. She was tapping her fingers. Her micro-expressions were off. She was scared, but not of you. She was anticipating something. Damian nodded slowly, studying her with an analytical, predatory gaze. "My own security detail didn't see it. The men I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to protect me were completely blind to what a waitress saw while pouring sparkling water." "People underestimate what service staff see," Clara said, lifting her chin. "And they underestimate me. Because of how I look. I'm big. I don't fit their aesthetic of a threat. So they talk in front of me. They plan in front of me. They become careless." Damian stepped closer. He didn't look at her with pity, nor did he look at her with the polite disdain she was used to from wealthy men. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated awe. "You weaponized your own invisibility," Damian murmured. "That is the smartest damn thing I have ever heard." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The sheer proximity of the man was intoxicating. He exuded raw power, yet there was a gentleness in how he addressed her. "Why did you do it, Clara?" he asked softly. "You could have just run. You could have let me die." "Because you said thank you," Clara blurted out before she could stop herself. Damian blinked, genuinely confused. "Excuse me. When I poured your water, you said thank you. You didn't wave me off. Last year, you tipped the dishwasher who burned his hand so he could pay his rent. You're a criminal, Mr. Rossi. But you aren't a monster. I wasn't going to let Chloe Vanderwall get you killed over her idiot brother." A heavy electric silence filled the room. Damian stared at her, the mask of the Mafia Boss completely falling away, revealing the solitary, fiercely loyal man underneath. "You're done waiting tables, Clara," Damien finally said, walking back around his desk. He pulled out a checkbook, wrote down a number, and slid it across the polished wood. Clara looked at the check. It was for $250,000. "That is your signing bonus," Damien said. "I am offering you a job, $500,000 a year. I don't want you to carry a gun. I don't want you to launder money. I want you to attend my meetings. I want you at my galas, my dinners, and my negotiations. I want you to sit quietly in the corner, and I want you to watch." He leaned forward, his eyes burning into hers. "Be my eyes, Clara. Tell me who is lying. Tell me who is plotting. Tell me who is going to betray me next." Clara looked at the check, then up at the ruthless king of the Chicago underworld. She took a deep breath, picked up the pen on his desk, and signed the contract he slid next to the check. "When do we start?" she asked. Over the next 6 months, the power dynamics of the Rossi Syndicate shifted in a way no one could have predicted. Clara became Damien's shadow. Officially, she was listed on the payroll of Rossi Logistics and Freight as a senior logistics consultant. Unofficially, she was his absolute ultimate weapon. At first, the capos and lieutenants scoffed. They saw a heavy-set, plain-faced woman following their boss into sit-downs and laughed behind her back. But the laughter died quickly. In November, during a tense negotiation with a corrupt city alderman named Wallace, Clara sat quietly in the corner, sipping tea. After the meeting, she told Damien that Wallace was sweating profusely, despite the AC, and his pupils were dilated signs of cocaine withdrawal or intense, immediate fear. She advised Damien to hold off on the bribe. 2 days later, Wallace was indicted by the FBI. He had been wearing a wire during their meeting. In January, she noticed Arthur Damien's longtime accountant subtly mirroring the body language of a rival boss during a neutral charity event. She investigated his ledgers with her meticulous eye for detail and found millions siphoned into offshore accounts. With every catch, Clara's confidence bloomed, and with her confidence came a stunning transformation. She didn't lose weight, she stopped apologizing for it. She carried her size with regal authority. Damien funded a brand new wardrobe hiring tailors to craft custom suits and dresses that accentuated her curves, framing her as a force of nature rather than a wallflower. But the most profound shift was between Clara and Damien. The professional barrier slowly eroded during long, late-night strategy sessions in the penthouse. They ordered takeout, drank expensive wine, and talked until dawn. Damien found himself fascinated by her brilliant mind, her wicked sense of humor, and her unwavering loyalty. For the first time in his violent life, Damien felt completely safe with someone. One evening, as they were going over shipping manifests, Clara reached for a file, her hand brushing against his. Damien caught her hand, his strong fingers wrapping around hers. Clara froze, looking up at him. "Damien." He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. He looked at her with a heat that made her knees weak. "You spend all your time analyzing everyone else, Clara," he whispered, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Have you ever analyzed how I look at you? I assumed you valued my counsel." She stuttered, her heart hammering. "I value your life," Damien corrected his thumb, tracing her jawline. "I value your brilliant mind, and I am entirely captivated by your beauty." "Damien, I'm not," she started, instinctively wanting to put herself down. "Don't!" he commanded, his voice rough but tender. "Do not insult the woman I love." The words hit her like a physical blow. Before she could process them, Damien leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, polite kiss. It was possessive, deep, and bruising a promise of absolute devotion. Clara melted into him, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders, finally allowing herself to step out of the shadows and be entirely seen. Their relationship remained a fiercely guarded secret until the annual Continental Charity Gala in April. It was the most important event of the year, bringing together the city's legitimate elite and its shadowed underworld. The gala was being held at a newly renovated venue, L'Etoile. The restaurant had been transformed, the very place where Clara had once scraped plates and wiped tables. The room was packed with billionaires, politicians, and mobsters. When the double mahogany doors opened, a hush fell over the room. Damien Rossi walked in, but he wasn't alone, and he wasn't with a plastic socialite. On his arm was Clara. She was a vision of absolute commanding power. She wore a custom-made, off-the-shoulder sapphire blue gown that draped flawlessly over her lush curves. Diamonds dripped from her neck, catching the light of the chandeliers. Her makeup was sharp, her hair styled into sleek vintage waves. She looked terrifyingly beautiful. Whispers erupted across the room like wildfire. The elite guests recognized her. The hostesses, the bartenders, the men in expensive suits, they all realized that the fat, invisible waitress they had ignored for years was now holding the arm of the most dangerous man in Chicago. A rival boss stepped forward, his eyes wide, offering a hesitant nod. "Mr. Rossi, and this must be your new partner." Damien didn't just nod. He pulled Clara closer, kissing the side of her head, in front of everyone, a public declaration of her untouchable status. "This is Clara," Damien said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "She is the only reason I am breathing. And if any of you ever look through her again, I will personally ensure it is the last thing you see." Clara looked out at the sea of terrified, respectful faces. She wasn't just seen anymore. She was feared. She was revered. The invisible waitress was gone forever, and in her place stood the undeniable queen of the Rossi Empire. If you were captivated by Clara's